Thank you, everyone. The performer team from MOCS has been here all morning working hard, and so we're excited now to kick off the public portion of our event. This is truly a team effort from everyone at ARPA to the entire performer team here doing everything. So I just want to make sure that I'm saying thank you to everyone because this is just an incredible amount of intelligent, hardworking people coming together to solve a really hard problem. So we're going to start off with some remarks from my boss, our Mission Office Director, Natalie Cates, and then we'll go into our Collaborative Voices panel. Then we will talk a little bit about MOCS, and then we'll go into hearing from the performers directly. So I am really excited to have so much incredible expertise in this room. I truly, as an OBGYN, was not sure this was a problem I would ever see solved. And I really think we will be able to solve it. I think it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be a wild ride, but I think that we will be able to solve this problem of not understanding how a baby's going during labor so that we can make labor safe for moms and for babies. So I'm very thankful for everyone here. And with that, I will pass it over to Natalie.
Thanks, Kate. I always like to start our kickoffs by polling the room. How many folks, is this your first interaction with ARPA-H? Amazing. For those online, it's about 50% of the room. MOCS is their first time interacting with our agency. One of the things that is a superpower of ours here at ARPA-H is to pull together the right interdisciplinary teams. And I'm just going to echo really quickly what Kate just said, that the magic here is in the people. It's going to be in your ability to work together, to push through lots of curveballs that I'm sure are going to come our way, and to really marry best-in-class technology with usability and creating the right setting and information at the right time for doctors, for patients, and for caregivers more generally. So I'm really excited to have you all here, and I can't wait to see all the amazing things that come out from this team. When I first started at ARPA-H, which was about 2 years ago now, and we were standing up this office, the idea of making a radical change in labor and delivery was a twinkle in my eye and my former colleague Jason Bruce's eye, and we met Kate. And it was really amazing to hear from somebody who has such a wide variety of experiences in labor and delivery paint a picture of how the world could be different. And one of the funny things about all ARPA-H pitches is they always start with how horrible the current state of the world is. And as all of you know, the current state of the world in labor and delivery right now is pretty abysmal. And it is not in alignment with all of the amazing things that are otherwise happening in healthcare and in technology in this country. For a little bit of context, as we kick off the public portion today, I want to talk a little bit about the Scalable Solutions Mission Office, where Kate's MOCS program sits, because I think we'll give you all context as to what we're really aiming for here. Our mission office is specifically focused on ensuring the best-in-class technologies make it to everybody. They are accessible, they are widely adopted, that they are scalable, i.e. scalable solutions. And as part of doing that, we're also really focused on ensuring that innovation in the spaces we touch happens faster and more cheaply for everybody else behind us. So when you all are thinking about what we want to accomplish with MOCS, Kate, for the performers here this morning, has very detailed technical and usability requirements specifically for the program, but we're also thinking more broadly about how we actually get these best-in-class technologies out to every mother who is having a baby. So you do not need to be in a specific location or with a specific provider or at a specific location, type of location. And we are really focused on ensuring that that is accessible and widely adopted. We're going to have a bunch of barriers that are not going to be technical in order to make that happen. And we're really excited to get this group together to ensure that we can make sure we're moving in the right direction. And that when we hit those barriers, we can work together to get to the other side. I am so excited, as I mentioned, for the performers teams here. Kate has spent many, many hours with her team, making sure that we're picking the best-in-class technology and the best-in-class teams to actually be able to move us forward and to be able to get to this amazing outcome that we're looking to achieve. As I mentioned, as part of those performer groups, we're really going to need to make sure that they are surrounded by the right broader community in order to achieve our goals and to make sure that this technology is usable and the technology is widely adopted. So I'm going to hand things back over to Kate. She's going to give you a bit of an update on MOCS as a program, and then we will transition into our first panel. Thank you so much for being here. We're really excited for this moment in time.
All right, so we're going to start with the abysmal status of labor and delivery, which is, it is incredibly difficult. And this is really what our first panel is meant to address, is how are things going right now, and how can we make things better? So if we look at labor and delivery right now, about 24% of primary C-sections, meaning it's that mom's first C-section, are done due to concerns about the baby. But we know that about 50% of the time, the baby's actually doing fine, and that C-section was unnecessary, but we just don't have the right tools to tell which ones are necessary. Unfortunately, what that means is that we're potentially doing up to 83,000 unnecessary C-sections yearly at a cost of $1 billion a year. That is talking about doing a C-section when it's not needed. Unfortunately, we also have the other situation where the baby can actually be low on oxygen and we fail to do a C-section in a timely manner, which can result in babies being born hypoxic, low on oxygen. And some of those, 23% of those, will go on to have neurologic morbidity and mortality, again, because we don't have the right tools. Unfortunately, we haven't seen change in this area. It's incredibly challenging technically, and what we've been spending a lot of time this morning talking about is there's also an incredibly complex stakeholder mix that's like payers and hospitals, and malpractice attorneys and nurses and doctors, and so many different stakeholders that change is incredibly challenging. So litigation is inherently involved in this. 75% of the biggest medical malpractice settlements have been around labor and delivery. So we see everyone practicing very conservatively. And like I said, with no new technology, there hasn't been a lot of updates in clinical guidance because there's just not much that's new. So at the end of the day, it results that the US spends double the expenditure per year of most high-income countries, and we have the worst outcomes. So that's where MOCS comes in. We really said, hey, we need to completely redo the technology that we have on labor and delivery. And so we've asked teams to do that in 2 technical areas. The first technical area was not my idea at all. It came out of stakeholder discussions. So as we were forming MOCS, we were on the phone with all kinds of different delivery sites with nurses and patient providers and midwives at those sites. And they said, gosh, it would be so cool if before a mom delivered, if I understood what her risk for having a complicated delivery was. Like, is there any way you could tell me what's the risk that this mom's going to need an emergency C-section or have a baby that goes to the NICU unexpectedly? And that seemed like a really interesting idea. So that is what the teams of TA1 are going to be doing. And I am going to let them explain that in their own words on their panels. But essentially, what we envision is that when the mom is in triage and the decision is made to admit her, she'll have a test done that tells us what her risk is. And if it's a low risk result, the patient can stay where they are at a low risk center, or staff can stay home, or you can stay at a lower nursing ratio, depending on the delivery site. If it's a high risk result, the patient might want to be transferred to a high level of care. We might want staff called in from home call, and we might want a higher nursing ratio. So the result here is that we see that moms and babies are healthy due to having the right medical resources at delivery. What we're eliminating with MOCS in this case is a baby in the NICU due to not having access to the right care at a delivery site, and rural hospitals with bad outcomes due to unexpectedly complex patients. For TA1, we have 3 teams, and they'll discuss their solutions on a panel. TA2 is what I did come to ARPA and say we needed, which is development of a novel intrapartum fetal monitor. So these teams are going to be creating a new monitor that takes what we currently have, which is fetal heart rate monitoring and contractions, and adding 2 completely novel sensors. We explain them kind of like additional fetal vital signs, so that we have, as a clinical care team, a broad understanding of how that baby's doing. And then we know that that information doesn't mean anything if it's not actionable, right? So we asked teams to come up with ways to communicate those results to care teams and to patients in ways that they can understand so that we see better care. Essentially, what we envision with this is that necessary C-sections will be done, and they'll be done at the right time for the baby to avoid hypoxic injury. So we'll see vaginal deliveries where you have a healthy baby, and we'll see well-timed C-sections, and we'll see babies that do well. But we won't see babies in the NICU at risk for long-term issues because we didn't understand if the baby was getting enough oxygen. And we won't see unnecessary C-sections that were done due to fear of litigation or just not understanding fetal status. And we have an interesting mix here. So we have 5 teams working on this with lots of different puzzle pieces that are all going to collaborate to get us the right solution. So when we put that all together, what we want to see is this current journey turn into the future journey. So right now we have patients that are admitted to labor and delivery. We don't know anything about their risk for complications. The baby's going to be put on the monitor for a fetal heart rate tracing. During labor, the moms can't really move because then we have to readjust things, and there's lots of wires. And then if we suspect hypoxia, the cause is unknown and the management is chaotic, which usually results in 5 to 10 people running into a patient's room to try to fix it as quickly as we can. So with MOCS, what we'll have is that on admission, the patient's risk for fetal hypoxia will be determined to guide decisions regarding delivery and staffing. We'll have fetal monitoring that allows clinicians to deliver healthy babies and only do necessary C-sections. And then during labor, patients will be able to be monitored and they'll be accurately monitored while moving around. And when hypoxia is identified, the next intervention will be suggested based on the suspected etiology. So with that, I would like to bring up our first panel. Happens to be all ladies. Ladies, if you don't mind coming up and joining me, that would be fantastic. Okay. So the other 2 panels are all performers. So this is really our incredible group of women that has volunteered to tell us a little bit about what's going on right now and why we haven't seen any change yet and what you're hoping for with MOCS. So we're going to actually, am I going to use this mic? I'll use the other mic. I'm going to pass you the mic, and if you could introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about how you currently interact with heart tracings.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Christina Davidson. I'm a maternal fetal medicine specialist by training. I am the new Chief Medical Officer at ACOG, and I'm very new, just a few weeks into this position, coming off of 20 years as an academic MFM. And really, labor and delivery has always been my favorite place to be. In fact, I used to say that I did a fellowship in MFM so that I could be my own consultant on labor and delivery. So, and I remember when, I explained to someone who may not be in the medical field what maternal fetal medicine is, I always say high risk OB. And one time I got the response, as if OB isn't high risk enough. And so I do think it really lends towards everything Dr. Arnold has already talked about. Intrapartum fetal heart rate monitoring has been a topic that I have been teaching my medical students, residents, fellows for 26 years now. I have been using the ACOG terminology and the NICHD terminology, and that was a big change in my training going into the categories. However, we have recognized the limitations of both fetal heart rate monitoring and the information it tells us. And even though we're all speaking the same language, there's not always a uniform way to approach what that language what it results in. I would always teach when those 5 to 10 people run into a room, we need to try and figure out what is the etiology, what's going on, why do we think this is happening? And I think with ACOG's most recent publication on fetal heart rate monitoring, they've really spoken to that as well from a standpoint of you can't just take the fetal heart rate information in isolation, because a fetal heart rate pattern in one patient may mean one etiology versus in the other. Also, as a maternal fetal medicine physician, it was my job to try and identify those women who are at higher risk for problems with their placenta that could lead to things like hypoxia and potentially a need for an earlier delivery. And so we use fetal heart rate monitoring even before labor and delivery to monitor and say, is it even safe to send you home? And always having to balance that risk of potentially a preterm delivery and the risks of prematurity with the risks of not acting on this monitoring. So I think having a better way to monitor and giving us information that is more actionable and more accurate and more timely to do all of the things that you've mentioned. It's just incredible and exciting to see that that's on the horizon. So I want to say thank you to Dr. Arnold and the ARPA-H team for spearheading this initiative. This such an important initiative. And then congratulations to all of the awardees. I looked over some of those applications or not applications, but what the research is going to be. And I'm just thrilled at the possibilities. And when it all comes out, I'm going to have to find a labor and delivery that will let me go back so that I can trial it out and teach the learners again. Thank you.
I'm thrilled to be here today. My name is Betsy Peelan. I'm the Executive Director of Hope for HIE, HIE standing for Hypoxic Ischemic Encephalopathy. I myself am a parent to a child that was born over 14 years ago. I had a very uneventful, normal first pregnancy until it wasn't. And at 37 weeks, Max stopped moving. I went into labor and delivery and had an emergency C-section. Max was transferred to be cooled at a tertiary care center. And there was very little support education except for families like mine. So this is dreams of now over 15,000 families in our community realized. I just can't even express my gratitude enough for the work that is being undertaken here. As someone who would have, I was in the clinic a couple of days earlier and everything checked out fine with the monitoring that existed. So a case study of also representation of many families all around the world. As you know, this is just such a difficult topic, and I really commend all of you for all of the work. I want you to put me out of business. So the prevention and intervention to improve quality of life for these children and families is just so essential and overdue. And I just want to thank you again for all of this work.
Hi, my name is Bailey Gannon. I'm an OBGYN hospitalist here at a hospital in DC. So my whole job is spent looking at fetal heart tracings. That's like literally what I do. Occasionally I have a GYN patient in the ER, but like most of my job is not only being a doctor to unattached patients who show up in DC on vacation or whatnot, for helping private attendings with their patients. But I'm also the safety officer for the floor, right? So we have the nursing staff constantly looking at the fetal heart rate tracings, but I'm also there as backup. And if a doctor isn't available, I'm first one to call. And I can't tell you how many times patients we're in the middle of labor and they're like, how's this going to go? And I was like, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but as soon as I get one, I'm going to be a billionaire. I'm going to be out of business. Well, turns out I'm not the one who's going to be the billionaire. You guys are. So I'm here for that, though. That's great. Just anything that can help me take better care of my patients and get them a healthy and safe delivery would be spectacular. I can't tell you how many times I go back for a C-section and, the baby comes out screaming and APGAR's in 9 and 9, and only pediatrician kids get 9 and 9. But this kid just miraculously, even with this category 2 tracing, is gorgeous. And I'm like, what was wrong with your heart rate then? Why did the tracing not tell me that, right? And of course, I'm always thankful. I'd always much rather have it be that than baby looks good. And then we get back there and the baby is not doing well when it's actually born. But it's frustrating. It's frustrating when we can't get a vaginal delivery for a patient who's desperately desiring one. We can't get a healthy baby, we can't get a healthy mom. And all we want is better technology. And, we have been left behind. I think women's health in general has been left behind. So this is just inspiring. And I'm just so excited that you guys are going to solve this problem for us. And we're going to take the best care of patients and moms. So thank you all so much.
Oh, tough act to follow. I am not a doctor. My name is Liz Powell. I'm the founder and head of Women's Health Advocates, and we do a lot of advocacy on women's health. And when you ask the question why, I think about how, women and people of color have been excluded from clinical trials since 1993. They finally required that inclusion. Women and pregnant women and lactating women excluded from trials. There's the fear of what might happen. And then there's lawsuit liability, questions. So I think that a primary problem is a lack of data. And what this is going to enable is that data, is that we finally have that data. So clinicians like you all can make the right decisions. I also will add, I'm a mother of twins, and I actually delivered about 48 minutes apart. So it was all good, but I can appreciate all the issues that we're talking about today. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Liz, maybe we can start with you again. why do you think we haven't seen any change? I mean, for those of you who don't know Liz Powell, she has her pulse on anything that's happening in women's health investments. So like, why are we sitting here talking about it 50 years later with not a lot of change?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think that there's many reasons. For far too long, women's health has been considered a niche. It's so interesting because literally all of us, 100% of us came from a wound. Like we wouldn't be here without it. So, but it's been niched over here. And then the other challenge with investment is that people see that there's no money to be made, but there is money to be made. There was actually a Follow the Exits report that we put out at the beginning of the year that showed $100 billion in ROIs in women's health investments already gained. People are rich today because of that. Half of that over the past 5 years. 27 unicorns. Now, this is beyond just maternal health, but broad women's health. So there's not only, do we need that data, better outcomes? We all came from moms some way, but also there's money to be made. So I think what's happening now, which makes me very hopeful, is that all this information is coming together and getting out into the public. So whether you're an investor, you're an entrepreneur, an innovator, a researcher, a clinician, patient, like it's all coming together. And I think thanks to this program that you started, it's amazing. You're facilitating a lot of growth. I think that we're turning the tide right now.
Thank you. Yeah. Bailey. Bailey, so we've been talking all morning about the importance of stakeholder engagement. And, it's so important, and it's also kind of challenging because we talked about the worst case scenario would be that in 4 years, like all of a sudden ARPA's like, hey, there's this new product. And every OBGYN is like, what are you talking about? This is my standard of care. So I guess two questions, Bailey. What do you want all these people to keep in mind as they're designing these products? And then how do you think is the best way they can engage? I'll give you the same questions.
I will say doctors and nursing staff, I would say, are a stubborn bunch. Like we have the way we do things. It's the way we've always done them. And muscle memory is very strong. In fact, we just got a brand new beds in our hospital and all the nurses hate them. They're like, we just can't get this bed on and off. And it's like, come on, you guys, the stirrups work. Let's get behind this. And they're not happy with it. So I think it has to be ease of use. I think it has to be I don't want to say it should be the same as fetal heart rate tracing because clearly that's not the best thing, right? But it has to be easy to use. It has to make sense. I think all of us come from a scientific background. It's if I know the why of something, it's much easier for me to explain it to patients. It's much more easier for me to accept it. So I think that's really helpful. And I think just knowing that it's going to make a difference, right? Knowing, again, the stirrup thing. I'm like, you guys, these beds have stirrups that work, so we don't have to hold blanks. That's a good thing, right? If I can get the nurses to buy into that, they'll buy into the new bed. So, if it's something that we can all get behind and we know it's going to help our patients, I think it's going to be easier for everybody. And I also think if the patients buy into it, right? I sometimes have mixed feelings about pharmaceutical companies putting out their commercials on TV and patients coming to me and asking me about new medicines. I find that a little weird, but I mean, the patients are also, I don't like to say this, clients, right? But they're driving this, right? So if you have patients clamoring for better outcomes as well, then it's going to help us get behind it more too. So I think as long as it's just going to be easy to use, everyone can get behind it. We have great data, and it's going to be more easily acceptable. But there are going to be some stubborn bunches. But I'm not going to be one of them. I'm going to be on board. So
thank you. And Betsy, same question. We actually patients were some of the hardest population to get a hold of in some ways. We were talking a little bit about that, at OBGYNs always talk about the labor and delivery is the one kind of procedure everybody goes into thinking they're going to have the best outcome 100% of the time. Nobody's expecting a complication. Everybody thinks it's going to be comfortable vaginal delivery, baby in the room, and go home postpartum day 1, maybe 2 is the backup plan or something. So what do you think in terms of what would you like the researchers to know, and then how can they best engage with patients?
Yeah, so I think Hope for HIE, we've been doing a lot of work on the neonatal and forward side. And I'm so excited to be in this room and talking to this group in particular, because our families are so generous with their time to give back and give feedback of what they thought went right, what they have suggestions for improvements. We are a very niche community, but they have rich experiences. These families have participated in clinical trials. The one therapeutic that we currently have intervention for HIE is therapeutic hypothermia. And we have families that participate in the original cooling studies all the way through clinical trials today. And what we found, especially on the regulatory side, the FDA and others around the world now really mandate anyone that's in therapeutic development to work with a patient advocacy organization if there is someone in the space for that indication, because the lived experience is so wonderful to bring in and effective to build the best trials, to build the best technologies. And so I think I've seen just wonderful multidisciplinary collaboration and hoping that this really fuses together a little bit more of that disconnect between the pre and post. And in particular, thinking about obviously the baby's brain, that's the whole, genesis of HIE and what is so important, as that's been really kind of ignored. And you think about that after a baby's been born too, you're looking at the heart and the oxygenation, but you're not really looking at brain health. There's now a lot of monitoring that's going on in neonatal EEG, but it's definitely all this swell. And I'm really have seen this now building in a huge momentum over the past 10 years, and this particularly 5 years. So I think just reaching out in particular to those advocacy organizations, not just HIE, but I know on the MFM side, there's a lot of advocacy groups that work very closely, for all sorts of different things. And we're all eager to help as much as we can because we're all in it together.
Thank you. Updates. Which questions specifically? I know I keep giving two-pronged questions, but I think and you can answer as both if you want to in an individual position. And I know you have your new ACOG hat on, but what do you want these researchers to know as they're building these new products, and then how can they collaborate with you?
Absolutely. Thank you. I would say, as someone who spent 15 years of my career leading quality and patient safety efforts at a large academic institution in Texas, and it spanned 2 hospital systems, one of them being a safety net hospital. So different resources, same care. And I even spent some time with our global health team working on similar types of things in Africa. So I think the key message here is, how are we going to get the information to the end users in a way where it's not just, okay, tomorrow we're implementing this new thing. This is going to revolutionize labor and delivery care. Like I said, I started my residency 26 years ago, and this is going to be the biggest change. Everything else that we have done maybe has been a change using something that we already knew existed, whether it was giving magnesium. We were already using magnesium for seizure prophylaxis for eclampsia, but now, we switched it over for fetal neuroprotection. So it was familiar, used in a different way. If we are completely doing away with intrapartum fetal heart rate monitoring, or, moving to different modalities, we're going to let people know how to use it and not be scared of it, because the risk is so high. The risk is so great. What we don't want to happen is that we get it wrong and, we end up with a bad outcome. And is it going to be that we don't even have access? We're going to have to figure out how to de-implement the current process. So, what are we going to do? Are we going to take away the fetal heart rate monitors that exist? And how is that going to impact, what we are currently using? Fetal scalp electrodes, what are those kinds of technology going to need? So I think engaging the stakeholders, the physicians, the nurses, and even the companies that are making the products that we're already using, and how can we all partner on this together in our national organizations to message this to their members? ACOG, speaking to ACOG, how can we get the information out, and what are ways that you all can give us information that we can help share, disseminate to get everybody ready for this? Because knowing from implementing major quality improvement initiatives, it's always preparation. You never go live with everything all at once. It may be stepwise, it may be iterative, and you always need to message the why and the impact.
Absolutely. We were talking earlier because I was I also keep saying OBGYNs are a stubborn bunch. So I'm glad that everyone has reiterated that. But we were also saying, it's going to be really easy, I think, to add additional monitors, right? When we're doing the initial trials and you're like, hey, you can have your fetal heart rate monitors and you can have these additional monitors. And then I think that moment for OBs where you're like, and now we're taking the continuous fetal heart rate monitor off and like covering up your old monitor, like that's going to be the pretty wild part. That's really going to need that buy-in that you said. Let me go back to Liz. Oh, Bailey, you have something?
Well, can I just say one other thing?
Of course.
One other thing that I am really kind of hopeful for this project as well is that it helps to like rebuild a little bit of trust between the public and physicians, just in general, to be honest. But with like social media and TikTok and all this baloney about free birthing, and not that that's, I mean, I can't say anything more about that. But I think that, we do C-sections to save lives, but sometimes patients think we're just doing them for other reasons. And so if we have more data and we have more specific things that we can tell patients, like we really need to do this now, that will hopefully help to rebuild some trust, and we'll have more women buying into the fact that we are really just here to protect them and their babies. And anything that can help rebuild trust with the medical community now would be amazing.
Great. Thank you. So Liz, I was going to ask you, because you do advocacy, you also do consulting. And so obviously everyone at some point is going to need more financing besides ARPA. And so we've been talking a lot about like, when is the right time to start engaging investors and how does that look? They're starting right now. They, are going to be starting phase 1 clinical trials in 2 years, which is really wild. It's a very, very, very fast timeline. But as they're getting started in the next, little bit, what would you say about when and how to start engaging potential investors?
Early and often. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of factors that go into bringing innovation to market and to patients. And getting the early funds, like whether it's, and my ideal is both, government money and a private investment. And you go after multiple sources within government, which is what I work on. We come up with all kinds of strategies to help companies get multiple sources of funds from government. But getting both those sources, I think, is super helpful for your company. And most investors that I've worked with, and I've helped companies get money, they then pour more investment in. They see it as like it's getting traction. This makes sense. So that's a key part, I think, of your strategy when you think long-term, how am I going to get this to patients as fast as possible with ROI? That's something to consider. The other thing is the regulatory pathway, right? And all the different, whether it's FDA approval, reimbursement, all those things have to be thought about. And, with the recent determination of unbundling maternal health care, it shows that it's the climate is actually quite warm for more innovation in this space. And I think it also shows, like, the same administration removed the black box warning for HRT for menopause. So this is an administration that wants to take chances and disrupt and innovate. And so I think that's something else to consider as part of your path to reaching patients. And it's never too early to have those conversations with these different regulators and how you want to come to market. But take the time to talk to experts before you present, right? Because you only have one chance to make a good first impression. And so you don't want to start down a path that might delay getting to market. So really do take the time to consult with experts before you do that. But I think it's never too early to talk to investors, different sources of R&D money, the regulators. And then, of course, as someone who talks to Congress all the time, you should be telling your members of Congress that you got this award. They want to brag about you. I mean, they're always looking for excuses to get out there in front of their constituents, and you're helping to give that. So make sure your member of Congress knows what you're doing, that ARPA-H, created this program, like all those things. All these things together are going to help bring more innovation to market to close gaps in women's health overall, and especially in this area.
Thank you. I think I want to ask you one more follow-up question, because I think founders get a little bit confused, not necessarily confused, or need more clarity around you get one chance for a first impression, but you don't wait to talk with investors until you have your polished pitch deck. And I think that disconnect can be a little bit confusing. So what would you say is just real quick, what would you say is the first meeting, kind of the substance of the first meeting that people have with investors?
So obviously data is always key. If you have data, that's the most helpful. But, I've talked to, and it's not like I'm a mind reader of investors, but I definitely work with a lot. And, the number one reason a lot of investors tell me they invest in a company, I wonder if you even know. Shout out. Yeah. The team. Yeah, it's the people. I think you said it too.
I said a handshake.
A handshake, a solid handshake. But yeah, it's the people. So how you yourself are presenting to the investors makes a huge difference. And then, of course, having the data, having the solid arguments, being like super crisp, right? Don't going off on tangents. Like super crisp, I think, is also really important. And by the way, these are the same things that work for talking to members of Congress.
That's true. Yeah, it's all the same principles of messaging. Well, we are almost out of time, so this is going to be the last kind of question. But this is a public kickoff. We have a lot of different people, different members of the audience that are watching this, and we haven't talked a lot about kind of the public and the public perception of labor and delivery. Like people are getting more and more aware of the terrible numbers that I showed, and Sarah Cliff is here and did a fantastic job of laying out the state of labor and delivery in her New York Times article. And so, I think there's a lot of people who are feeling disillusioned with labor and delivery and moving away from labor and delivery, as Bailey said. And so I'm wondering, this program obviously gives me a lot of hope, but I'm wondering if you could just talk to, the average person out there who maybe knows the state of labor and delivery, but doesn't know much about this. What are you most hopeful for? Liz, you can go first. Sorry to put you on the hot
I
spot.
thought you were gonna skip right over me.
Nope, everybody gets a shot.
Most hopeful for, because so in my work, women's health advocates, all 50 states, advocates everywhere. We educate and advocate to Congress, to the administration, et cetera. What I am most hopeful is that I'm seeing people share their stories. Their voices are getting elevated. Women's health is getting elevated. Maternal health is getting elevated. So I think there's like an interest level and an energy there that maybe we haven't seen before by all aspects of all sectors coming together. So that would be my answer.
I think I'm just excited for like a revolution, just like a total change in how we do things. And I think that is going to just save lives, like just straight out save lives, which is going to be amazing. And then I think that's just going to trickle down to, again, that rebuilding of trust and just like understanding that we are here as physicians and nurses, and everybody is just like only here for one benefit, which is truly a safe birth and a healthy birth and a safe for both mom and baby. I also prefer them to be happy, but I tell them at the end of the day, I prefer to be safe. And I never mean that to sound mean to them, but I really just want you guys to be safe. And so I think if that all comes together, and it's just going to spiral into this wonderful thing. And I'm excited because I'm, mid-career probably. So hopefully I'm going to see it in real life, before I retire.
It's ARPA. You're going to see it.
I'm 55 yet, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're all ready for this, right? This is overdue and revolutionary, I was going to say, especially when we're talking about accessibility and the impact that they can not only have in the U.S., but globally, and being a leader in that is huge. So I think just evangelizing, this in every space that we can is so key. And like I said, our families are ready for it. They're the ones that, chant from the rooftops about their experiences and wanting to improve them, regardless of what led to HIE.
We have a lot of people wanting to reach out, so we will put that in touch.
And I'm hopeful, really just building off of everything that everyone else has said, that we're going to make our labor and delivery units safer and elevate the experience for everyone, to elevate the patient experience and the people taking care of them, because there is that trauma from the care team when something doesn't work out the way, it doesn't turn out the way that I'm hoping it did. And so by having more objective data, it's not that it's been guesswork. We're using the information and the technology the way we know how to use it. We just need different technology, new technology, more objective criteria on what's really happening. And then everyone else can, instead of trying to spend the time figuring out, okay, do we give it 30 more minutes? Do we do this? Do we do that? We could spend more time on having objective criteria and elevating the experience of everyone involved.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to our panel. We're going to transition into the performers, but let's get a round of applause for our guests. Thank you. That was fantastic. And like I said, I think many people will want to be in touch. So with that, we're going to transition immediately into the TA1 performers. So if you're a TA1 performer on the panel, if you could come on up. Right, so most people in this room, they now know what TA1 is, but most people are not familiar with what you all are doing. So first step is, I would love for you to introduce yourself and then describe to us, in information that the average patient could understand what you're going to be working on.
Hi, my name is Farah Biba, and we are leading the QUSP team. QUSP stands for Quantitative Ultrasound in the Placenta. So really what we are trying to do is we're trying to use ultrasound, which is not new, but what is new is we are trying to get a quantitative measure from the ultrasound data. And we are looking particularly into the placenta, which is a very neglected organ so far. And by now, researchers do know that placenta is the reason for many adverse pregnancy outcomes. So we're looking into the placenta, trying to understand placenta using ultrasound and get a measurable values that can predict the risk of hypoxia.
Yeah, this is incredible technology that I did not know about until I came here and started researching what might work. And so their group has experience in quantitative ultrasound, which means that nobody has to interpret the image. It produces a result on its own. So a nurse can use this. It's going to be a patch. So there's no sonographer involved. A nurse can put an ultrasound patch on, and instead of getting grayscale images, gets a number about the quality of the placenta. So we're very excited about that. Okay, thank you. Peter, same thing, introduction, and then a little bit about your tech.
Sure. I'm Peter Nguyen. I'm a senior scientist at the Bees Institute, and I am one of the technical leads on our MOCS project. So it stands for Fetal Extracellular Monitoring of Oxygenation. And the whole concept behind our technology is to kind of eavesdrop on the placenta. So the placenta, just like all the other organs in the body, they're actually sending out packets of information to each other. And we've known this for several decades now. And there's still a lot of ongoing research into what exactly they're doing, talking to each other, what's the content of these extracellular vesicles. And so our concept is to actually capture these signal packets that are coming from the placenta. So the placenta is generating these huge amounts of these extracellular vesicles, and inside of them, there's rich information on what's going on, right? And us, as well as other people, know that when you're in a stressful state such as hypoxia, they're loaded with information. And so we're trying to develop a platform so that we can actually listen in on these conversations and generate a objective molecular diagnostic out of that.
Yeah, it's a really neat thing because I think, to Liz's point, so many times we get new technology or we get new knowledge and it's applied to women's health last. And looking at extracellular vesicles from the placenta is like a really neat time where we're going to apply this innovative technology to women's health first. It's truly cutting edge, not just in women's health, but like cutting edge across all of medicine. So it's really exciting. Louise?
Hi, my name is Louise Laurent. I'm a maternal fetal medicine high-risk obstetrician at UCSD, also professor there. And my research actually covers some extracellular vesicle work as well as other molecular biomarkers. I represent a team that has expertise across proteomics and engineering and things like that. So the teams over there, please ask them if you have any questions. But our major goal is to do pre-labor risk assessment using biomarkers that we will discover in the course of our project, but also to develop the magnetic biosensors to be able to bring them to point of care. And just like has been discussed, we really do look forward to transforming maternal and fetal care. We, as an MFM, I agree totally that we want the process to be safe, but we also want to get out of people's way when it is a low-risk situation and let people enjoy their labor and delivery experience.
Absolutely. Thank you. So that was a great overview of the technology. Can you tell us a little bit, like ARPA will sometimes say, like if you're wildly successful, so let's say we're, 4 years later and your product is implemented on labor and delivery. What are patients and providers, like nursing, the whole care team, going to understand that they didn't understand before? What's particular about your technology that you think, what kind of additional insight will your technology specifically provide?
Yes, I'll try to answer, but it's kind of from an engineering point of view.
That's okay.
I'm definitely going to have many sessions with clinicians to have a better idea. So what we have understood that we don't have anything of standard of care at this point as a triaging tool that will tell a patient that whether it's safe to have a home delivery versus whether you should really go to a tertiary hospital where you have access to all the advanced care. So basically, if this is successful, probably we're going to have a tool at kind of a triaging tool. Again, I will emphasize that this would be a screening tool, which will have basically a risk score. And again, this will be a part of many different pieces. So there will be many other information, and it will be an added information to the clinical team there that will help them to take a better management decision that whether this patient can be sent to for a home delivery if that is a priority or that is the need for the patient, or does that patient need better or advanced monitoring for the case. So I think what we are kind of envisioning that we have a tool that would give us a risk score. So high score, that means that patient need immediate care, immediate monitoring, close monitoring. And another below low risk score, that is basically, it's a very low risk. So basically whatever the choice of the patient that can be continued. And there could be something intermediate, which is there could be a possible close monitoring, nothing triggering at this point, but that patient would be closely monitored to see whether something is necessary in the near future. So with that, hopefully that would make the experience of many pregnant women much better compared to the current state of the practice. So that would be our hope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And we also, so at ARPA, we have a great Division of International Affairs team here, and they helped us do kind of a whole world analysis of how this is being done in other countries. And there's just not a lot of tech in other countries either. And so it's exciting to think about how this tech can be used throughout the world once you create it. Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, I think, just looking forward for our vision, what we see now is there's, there's physiologic monitoring, which could obviously be a lot better. That's what TA2 is about, is creating the next generation. But what's really lacking is an objective molecular signal, a diagnostic, if you will. So imagine like a pregnancy test, for example, that's a molecular diagnostic, but imagine that didn't exist and you could only use physiologic monitoring to tell somebody was pregnant, right? That'd be so cumbersome and difficult. And we want to bring that level of objective molecular diagnostic to maternity, which it's frankly has always been lacking. So I think that paired with the new physiologic monitoring and also machine learning, I think all those integrated together will really put us where we need to be, where we should be. Yeah.
Thank you. Louise?
Yeah. So where I practice, we actually have in hospital both a birth center and a labor and delivery. And part of the hardest things that happens to me, because I do mostly outpatient practice, is I do ultrasounds and consultations as an MFM. And the hardest thing is to tell a patient that they have risked out of the birth center, a family who wants to be in the birth center. And I feel like they risk out for very binary reasons. Now we have a folder that has all the reasons that you cannot be in the birth center. And I feel like what I would love to do is to have this risk assessment that is, one, more of a continuum where it takes in multiple sources of information and then feeds out a risk assessment, but also to have this be a shared decision-making tool, right? So it's information for the doctor and the family so they can make their own decisions about what the right environment is for that birth to happen. And then to have the medical team or the care team be best prepared for what's coming their way. So it's not so much black and white, but more sort of a continuous, nuanced tool that can be used for communication and decision making.
I love that. Thank you. To get more technical, ARPA is really meant to fund these moonshot ideas, right? We don't want to fund anything that's like iterative, like just a little bit better. We wanted to fund ideas that people really looked at it and said, like, no way, I had no clue that was like remotely possible. And so that's really what we looked for. And I think sometimes, we talk to you guys long enough and the ideas start to seem logical, but they are all moonshot ideas. They're very technically challenging. So can you give us a sense, like when you look at, again, 4 years into the future of having this product, like what is the biggest technical challenge that you're taking on? Like what is the highest risk thing that you're like, I don't know if this is going to work?
Okay, that's a very interesting question. So I think pointing one would be difficult. I would foresee there would be many. So maybe kind of give a glimpse. So basically, we do have a start point. So we know that we can do a good job with given certain condition. For example, if there is an expert sonographer, we know we can do a good job. We know that if we have a certain ultrasound scanner, we know we can do a good job, right? But now the unknowns that we are heading toward, and we have excellent team. We have Rob Rowling, who is a world-renowned ultrasound expert. We have Sonas Microsystems, so Hani Iskandari, who is leading this Sonas patch. And that basically tackled this question where we can not eliminate, but if we don't have a sonographer in that clinical setting, can we still succeed? Can we design a device which can basically collect enough regions from the abdomen that does cover good chunks of placenta for us to do the analysis? And then from that, can we do a good job finding that placental region and basically use our technology? So we know that we have a good technology, but can we emulate or simulate that with all this restriction where we don't have a good sonographer and we have a new device which is user-friendly, but we'll have to make it also very reliable so that the technology, the QUS, does succeed there. Second challenge, which is whether can we make whatever we are getting as a tool that clinicians do accept. So that is another big challenge where we do have evidence that we have a technology, we have a tool that can distinguish placentas between healthy and diseased cases. But maybe that is good, but maybe that is not good enough. We probably need more evidence that why our technology works. We are talking about placental quantification or placental characteristic or placental property quantification, but really what are we measuring? So again, we are very lucky to have Dr. Lesmith, who is a placentologist, who will be providing us with the validation that why placenta works. So basically what we're measuring using the ultrasound does correlate with what is happening in placental insufficiency. So these are the challenges. We are hoping that we have the right people, we have the right team to solve those or address those challenges, but again, this could be difficult. Yeah.
Thank you.
Those would be
Peter, same question.
Yeah, from a technical point of view, going back to the whole extracellular vesicle being kind of eavesdropping on this communication. So the signal can be minuscule actually for a lot of these. And so you can think of like, okay, out of all the EVs, we're listening for placental EVs, right? So it's kind of like tuning into the right frequency. But then you listen on that wavelength and all you hear is a whisper. So that's the signal, it's a whisper. And you need to amplify that so you can understand what the conversation is. And so that amplification is basically what our platform is trying to do. Take that signal, amplify it to something that you can, with high confidence, say, okay, I know this is actually what's going on. That's the first thing, is amplifying that signal. The second thing is more practical, which is we can do this right now in the lab. It'll take like an hour or more. And for something where you have a super busy nurse, she doesn't have time, you want this to happen very rapidly and very quickly. So getting our platform to perform, in under 30 minutes, that's going to be a huge technical challenge. But it's one that, we can look at, we can say, all right, there are strategies to do that. And we're going to have a lot of fun trying. So yeah, those are the two things.
Thank you.
I'm not sure whether we're just overconfident, but I think that we do have the right team to look at and overcome all the technical challenges, doing the biomarker discovery work, designing the assays, making the sensors, making the device. I think we have the right people to do that. What keeps me up at night is the biology. What are the biomarkers going to be that give us this insight at a sufficient level of accuracy that we can provide meaningful results? Part of that biology also is that every mom and baby pair are different from each other in vastly different ways, right? There may be, we're talking about terms, so at least we're restricting ourselves to a relatively small period of gestational age, which is wonderful. But moms and babies both are very different sizes. Their placentas are very different sizes. Their placentas have very different functions. Sometimes, there are ones that people with diabetes, people with underlying hypertension, people with preeclampsia, people with rheumatic disease, rheumatologic diseases. So many different risk factors. And also then you get into labor where so many different things can happen. How long is the labor? How strong are the contractions? How good is the blood flow at baseline between the mom and the uterus? So many different variables. So the biology is kind of what in some ways is the most challenging, but in another way, also the most fascinating part, that we'll learn so much about that in the process of this project.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. With that, we're going to move on to TA2, but if we can get a round of applause for TA1. Okay, and we can have our TA2 representatives come up. That would be great. We'll grab one more chair. So these are our TA2 performers. TA2 is again about totally replacing how we do intrapartum fetal monitoring. I mentioned the choices here got a little wild, but we have incredible technology that we are so excited about. What we ended up funding is we have one group from Australia that couldn't be here today. We funded them to essentially for OBGYNs, it'll make sense. They're going to quantify placental reserve. So they're going to look at after a contraction happens and the placenta is getting less blood and the contraction stops, how quickly does that blood come back? And so they weren't able to be here because they're in Australia. Otherwise, we have these 4 lovely performers. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves and then I'll explain a little bit more about the program structure. But if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the technology you're being funded for, that would be great.
Thanks so much. I'm Liz Golden. I am the co-founder and CEO at Wavelet, and we have an incredible team. We're focused on what Betsy in the previous panel talked about as the most important piece, and that's the brain. So we provide non-invasive fetal brain well-being monitoring. We do that through essentially sensors on the abdomen, and the technology is, we've been working on it for a number of years, invented by Dr. Jose Cortez Briones. So we're really excited to bring this forward. And since the 70s, they've been trying to do fetal EEG. And so we're really excited to finally be bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Baer. I'm an associate professor in biomedical engineering at Tulane University, and we are funded to further develop our photoacoustic imaging technology. And so what that is, it's a little bit like ultrasound, only we use light to generate information about tissue ischemia. So we can produce maps of the tissue that provide information about oxygenation, ischemia of the placenta or the fetus or whatever is in the field of view. So we're really excited to further develop our technology for implementation in this project.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tambu. I'm a professor in computer science at Dartmouth, and I'm leading the project for Harmony together with my colleague Shiezo from Colombia. So what we are developing is a suite of wearable devices, including an earpiece that will be worn by the mother to monitor mother's physiological signals, including heart rate, core temperatures, among many others, and also a smart chest belt, the smart belt that monitor fetal's signals that include fetal's ECG, among other signals that we will be integrating into the system. The core focus of our system is the zero positioning angle. We all know that during labor, the mother move a lot, right? And that causes a lot of problem to nurses where the position of the sensors is displaced and it brings a lot of noise. And also the system, even with nurses making decision or physician making decision, they really need high quality signal, right? And with the advent of AI and machine learning, data is even more important because the common saying that we often say is garbage in, garbage out. So now if we get a lot of noisy signal, no matter how good your AI and machine learning algorithm is, it will still it still can make a good use of the system itself, right? So that's the core focus of what our system is going to be. And our hope is really to build that core backbone to be able to integrate not only the sensors that we are developing and have in mind, but also having an open interface standard so that other sensors 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and down the road can integrate into this open ecosystem so that we can really open up what the capability of the system can be. And I'm super, super excited about this because this is really the dream come true for us when I spent the last 6 years founding my own company and commercializing a set of technology that we develop out of the universities. And one thing we found that the most challenging part is the buying in and talking about what the output is and being able to have an open ecosystem that other can plug in. And this is a very, very exciting opportunity for us.
Thank you.
Right, my name is Jana Kanistoff. I'm the PI of Omega. I'm a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm leading Omega with my co-lead Tiffany Ko at Children's Hospital Philadelphia. Unfortunately, Tiffany could not be here today. So I'm going to start with what Omega stands for. Omega is an acronym that stands for Optical, Mechanical, Electrical Global Assessment of Fetal Hypoxia. And so pretty much the title itself tells you what we're doing. And I want to focus first on the global assessment. So we really started saying it's like fetal hypoxia is not just a question of the fetus. So let's measure the mom, the uterus, as well as the fetus. And so we're having our solution is essentially, I used to call it a belt, but probably more like a belly blanket that includes a multitude of sensors. And they are optical sensors to measure oxygenation on the mom's side, on the uterine side. We measure blood flow, uterine blood flow, electrical signals is ECG contractions, but really focused on high density EMG sensors covering the entire abdomen for looking at uterine contraction propagation over time. We're building ultrasound patches to really measure layer thickness changes over time. And we're the second team also being funded on fetal EEG, so really focused on brain function of the fetus. And so it's incredibly difficult to put all of those multitudes of sensors into one workable device. So we pay a lot of attention to how is it going to look like? How is it going to feel? So a lot of end user engagement very early on. And we're focusing a lot on hardware integration, making sure that it's not just a multitude of sensors, but it's really one device that works together and gives one actionable item output. So of course, there is the last piece of all of it is then physiology informed AI in conjunction with industrial design and UX, UI UX design, making sure whatever the algorithm spits out is actually actionable and interpretable.
Thank you. So one of the things that happened with MOCS is we have a relatively new director at ARPA who really challenged us to go even faster from the time of Proposers Day to awards. And so these teams got to be guinea pigs and go through all of that. It was incredibly fast. You all were fantastic. And one of the things we did was we had what we called pre-proposal discussions where we said, just come talk to us about what you're working on, what your solution is, and let's talk about if it's a good fit and what parts are exciting. And so we got to do all of that with you. And one of the most exciting parts about that was that, you know, these people kept getting on the screen and just saying, like, I've been working on this for a decade. Like, this is what I am passionate about, and I haven't had funding. And if I had funding, this is what I would be able to do. And so, you know, this room of people are not people who, you know, up and decided that they wanted to look at the placenta or try to help out in this area. This is lifelong passions, which I am very appreciative of. So could you give us a little bit of a sense of, like, what were you working on before MOCS, and what part of MOCS were you like, there's no way I'm ever going to be able to accomplish that? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm laughing because my lab is, and pretty much all of my collaborations have been mostly focused on human brain. I'm more on the neurotechnology side, and pretty much all of the collaborators and partners for MOCS are more on the neurotechnology side. But I did work on fetal pulse oximetry for about a decade. And so I'm laughing because I'm thinking, like, I worked on it and I thought it was too hard and I stopped. And then the ARPA call came out, which allowed me to take a step back and say, okay, if we had the opportunity to start again, like, how would we flip the problem? Like, let's not focus on one technology, but try to figure out what is the technology behind it that I think has the most success. And so, but yeah, what I worked on predominantly was neurotechnology for the human brain, also dolphin brains, and trying to do brain sensing in dolphins, which is actually surprisingly useful for MOCS as well. But I'm not going to get into that.
So yeah, my lab and I have been working on building wearable devices and mobile devices for the last 2 decades. And I spent the last decades on really building wearable devices for health and health monitoring and also stimulation to improve health condition. And the result of that research was we turned into a company that took us really 6 years from building from the concept to mass market for consumer health. And the experience that we found there was that in order to build a product, you don't need to perfect all pieces of the technology itself, but you really need to understand the user's need and then integrate what's already there good enough, and then push it all the way to mass production, to commercialization, to marketing and sales, so that you can get the product to people's hand. And that 6 years of experience was really eye-opening for me, because before, the benchmark has always been publishing, getting grants, but then that was the moment where, once we launched our product, the moment that we have 10 users, 100 users, 1,000 people, 10,000 users that using, paying, and it really make the actual difference in their everyday life. I mean, our product at the time was helping people to sleep faster. And that it's when I realized that, yes, that is the power of the technology that we already have in our hand, but the value of integrating that technologies in a way that it's really get that technology to people's hand is massive. Right, so that's why I decided that once we launched our product in the company, I came back to academia with the mindset of really picking and developing the technology with the end in mind. And when I saw this MOCS program, I was so excited. And probably that was the first thing that I told Kate during our meeting, that it is rare to see a program that has that level of focus on the practicality and really bringing the product to the market, right? So when we applied for the program, we didn't think about it as a proposal. We really think about that as if we were to build a product now, what is the opportunity to make the impact and how that product would look like? And the great thing and the reason that I'm excited about that was we actually we're trying to improve the standard of care that has been there for 50 years. It means that it's probably pretty easy for us to do because the bar was pretty low, right? So that's why we're like, so that the amount of impact that we can do is massive. So that was the reason why we put our head down, really think about the solution, and then the decision of what system we would be building was actually driven from the interaction with nurses, interaction with the physician, and that's another angle that make this program was really fit with what we have been looking for, which is we build the product to help to improve the current to solve the pinpoint that the nurse is currently having, which is they have to place the sensor or then retrap the sensors over and over again throughout the laboring process. And we really hope that we can deliver that to make their life a little bit easier, so that instead of spending the nurse's time to take care of the device itself, we try to give them back the time so that the nurse have more time to take care of the patient, so that the standard of care, the quality of care will be better.
Thank you. One thing you'll hear a lot from ARPA, I think they talked about this in TA1, and then you definitely just heard it from Yana and from Tam, is that one of the unique things about MOCS is, like, outside of MOCS, typically what would happen is that each sensor would be developed individually, or like Louise would find her biomarker and then develop the sensor. And with MOCS, we said, like, we don't have time for all of that. Like, try it all at once. Like, we're going to give you a big enough budget that you can try all of these things at once. And see what works, because we're not sure, I don't think anyone is sure that one sensor will answer it all. We think that kind of like we have in all the time we have in patients in the hospital, we have so many vital signs, right? We use all of those vital signs to understand what's going on with the patient, and we understand what it means when one is out of whack and the others are normal, and vice versa. And with the baby, we have one vital sign, and probably adding one more is not going to be enough. But if we add a bunch more with AI, we can probably get a lot of insights. And so these are teams that are incredibly comfortable with that high level of risk of saying, like, you know, the logical way of doing this would be one sensor at a time and understanding each, but we're going to try it a different way to see if we can get change faster. The other piece that Tam was alluding to is one of the, and Yana, with the dolphins. It's really hard to get a sensor from a baby that's like swimming in amniotic fluid, right? That's incredibly challenging. And then the second challenging piece is if you get that signal, how do you know it's the baby, right? That could be the mom. And so Yana's experience with dolphins is actually incredibly applicable to trying to non-invasively understand the baby. And then Tam's experience with Earable as well answers that question of how do you know it's not the mom, because he can actually just subtract any signals that are coming from the earpiece as maternal and use the rest as fetal or placental. So for Carolyn and Liz, you all have taken on incredibly challenging sensors. And so Carolyn and Liz both have incredibly innovative sensors that are exactly what ARPA wanted, of like, we don't know if this is possible. And they're working on it, which is incredible. For you all, like, can you explain to us a little bit more? And I know you did a little bit, but explain to us a little bit more about, like, you know, why don't we have this sensor yet? And what is it going to add? Because I think, especially with photoacoustics, that is like such a new technology that I think a little bit more depth there of understanding it would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Start, because I was preparing for the other question.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, so photoacoustic imaging is a pretty new technology. There is an FDA-approved medical imaging system, which is available for imaging breast cancer. However, when we think about translating it for use during pregnancy, there are some extra considerations, right? So we have to image deeper, and we also have an additional barrier to overcome for, I think, patient acceptance and safety, demonstrating safety. A little bit along what you were saying before, I'm going to have to say this anyway, but the funding in this area has been so difficult to obtain. And I think some of it is a lot of these preconceived notions of whether these technologies will or will not work in these environments. It reminded me of, there's a lack of data, therefore you can't demonstrate the burden of proof that these things work in order to get the funding to continue to develop them. We kind of are in this double bind in women's health and in pregnancy. So, I'm excited that we get this opportunity to further develop our technology. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So essentially, advances in artificial intelligence are just now enabling the signal processing of complex fetal brainwaves, allowing for non-invasive fetal EEG. And essentially, there's a lot of noise that needs to be filtered out in order to get meaningful data that can be interpreted. And with fetal EEG, there's a ton of data on invasive fetal EEG during labor and delivery with an electrode placed transcervically that shows that it is a much earlier real-time detector of neurologic status, which is what everyone's looking for brain injury. And that's why we're incredibly excited.
Absolutely. We're almost out of time. I think with the last question, I would love to hear from you all because we did have so many discussions about stakeholders and what we need in order to make TA2 successful. And it's going to be a real uphill battle to get. Everyone's going to be excited about the technology, but then the actual implementation is going to be really hard. And so in terms of like this room and the people online, what help do you need? Like what, if you could get one person to reach out to you, what would they help you with? What's the missing puzzle piece still?
I love that. Well, just to talk about how ARPA-H accelerates things, and it's already been incredible. So we are currently launching a study in Australia, and I know some performers are on the photo. We're talking with them and essentially going to be collecting FSE invasive data with them. And I think maybe some other teams are as well, but essentially that partnership has been incredible. So we are looking for additional sites in Australia who will partner with us on data collection. And just incredibly, we're so excited about the progress so far.
Question. So I think, I think the biggest unknown for us is really going to be the regulatory, right? And how we go from a technology to something that can actually be used in the clinic. Having the extra barrier of it being for pregnancy, right? And now you have not just one person to consider, but two. And how that both increases the risk, but how can we kind of use that to our advantage and expedite things through regulatory? That would be fantastic.
I am actually very positive that we will be able to deliver something. And I think that we will be able to deliver something on time. And the reason I have that belief is because, we have great people in the room, and this is such a great initiative with great support, right? And it's and again, the bar that we're trying to improve is really low, right, compared to the 50 years technology. So I think we can ship something. Now, the challenge is not going to be in the technical part. Because as I said, if we set our mind that we don't need a perfect technology, we just need a good enough technology to change the current state of the art. and then we really we really make all the effort to push it to the market, then we will be able to make it, right? So I think that's the first point. I mean, the second is if I have what would really help us to accelerate is the willingness and the openness of teams and individuals who are part of the initiative to really share, talk, be open, discuss, and really have one single goal of pushing a product to the market. And then if we have that mindset and we work together, I think we'll be successful.
I think the other leads have already brought up a lot of good points, and I agree with most of them. And I want to maybe add to what Tam has been saying. I think one of the biggest hurdles that I see and where we all could use help is patient numbers. Because at the end of the day, fetal hypoxia is not as frequent as you would want with a single device in a single hospital, maybe to then really demonstrate that the stats work out, that your system is accurate. And so Omega has 3 hospital sites included. We will be able to recruit a lot of patients. But I think my biggest question is going to be, is it enough? Is it like, do we need more hospital sites? How willing are others help us obtain ground truth? So the more we can collaborate, even with access to hospitals, access to data, the better. That includes retrospective data. I mean, I would love to see all fetal heart rate and contraction time traces be publicly available, including pH as well, to start really training much larger AI models. And so the more we can share, the better this program will be. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, can we have a round of applause for TA2? Okay, well, that is the close of our program. This investment, we've announced it's a little over 90 million. It's 4 years. I doubt we'll get another shot at this. And so we are going to be, all of us, working incredibly hard to make sure that something from TA1 and something from TA2 makes it to the market. That is not something that just the performers or ARPA can do independently. And so part of the reason for this public kickoff is to ask you to stay engaged and to help. Because we know this is change that people want, but we need to know the nitty-gritty of exactly what you want and if we're meeting those criteria and what's going to make it successful. And so we truly view this as a kickoff, not just for the MOCS performers, but for this collaboration, because it is going to be necessary in order for any of this to change. So we are asking you all to please stay engaged and help us make the United States the safest place in the world to have a baby.